Hello and welcome. Thank you for being with us in this session, and I hope you're all well and healthy. In the next 15 minutes, I'll be presenting the research work that Maria, Tina, and I have been doing on the impact of preparedness investments in the humanitarian supply chain. Firstly, I'd like to give you some more background since the research has been going on for quite some time. Then I'll take a deeper dive into the problem statement, our research questions, and the system dynamics model we have built. Finally, we will present and discuss some of our key findings. Our research work started back in 2016 with the preparation for the World Humanitarian Summit, when the logistics cluster reached out and asked us to jointly draft a report on supply chain opportunities and challenges in the sector. Subsequent to the report, we have run an extensive study that showed that the supply chain is indeed the backbone of humanitarian operations, but that organizations are having trouble to build supply chain capacities prior to disasters happening. Based on those results, we entered into a second project where we started analyzing the potential impact of preparedness investments. The model we built is at the core of our presentation today. What followed was several presentations to the humanitarian community and donors, and we were able to achieve first results by making humanitarian agencies more aware of the relevance of supply chain management in convincing donors to fund more preparedness efforts. Due to the quickly changing environment with disasters happening around the world, with constraints on the funding side, there's obviously different and new ways needed to operate for humanitarian agencies. Investing in building capacity in the supply chain seems to be a good way to make humanitarian operations more effective, more efficient, to ultimately save time, costs, and lives. However, systematic proof and fact-based evidence on the actual impact of those investments is lacking. Furthermore, the different operational settings that humanitarian operations are working in, and specifically the supply chains, is not sufficiently considered in research yet. This leads us to our two research questions. Firstly, how does supply chain performance in centralized and decentralized and hybrid settings differ in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, and local social impact generated? Secondly, how does supply chain preparedness affect the supply chain performance of different operational settings, and what is the expected return on investment? We applied system dynamics methodology because humanitarian supply chains are characterized by dynamic complexity. They're uncertain, there's constraints, many trade-offs, there's a very unknown context, and many different stakeholders are involved. The combination with case studies is actually advised to provide strong and valuable findings. Our system dynamics model is based on 5 case studies that we have run for different disaster responses with 4 different humanitarian organizations of different operational settings. I'd like to present the different operational settings to you, which are differentiated from each other, both on a structural level as well as on a parameter level. I'd like to go deeper into the centralized setting, where the global headquarters is taking the dominant role. If there's a disaster happening in the country, it's the global headquarters that deploys people, equipment, as well as items, and manage the supply chain on the ground to respond to the needs. At the same time, in this setting, the global headquarters is also responding to other emergencies happening elsewhere outside of the country. So that could mean that if there's a disaster happening very close to the disaster in the country under study, that there might be limitations in terms of staff available, as well as equipment and items. The major difference to the decentralized setting is that the decentralized setting is having a national office that is very much operating independently and is working with its own staff, as well as procure mostly on local markets to respond to the disaster. The hybrid setting, on the other side, is a combination of the two. So you have the global headquarters and the national office responding to the disaster together, and they will be deploying people together, and they will be procuring both locally and internationally. Similar to the centralized setting, here the global headquarters is also responding to other emergencies. The system setting for our model looks like this, that we're reflecting the supply chain end-to-end from the assessment all the way to the distribution. and looking at the preparedness investments that go into the supply chain and what impact they do have on the different functions of the supply chain, from sourcing, transport, storage, distribution, as well as on the HR supply chain capacity of the people, of the staff that are deployed. In our model, we measure the supply chain cost, we measure the lead time, both for the first 10% of items delivered, as well as for the 90% of items delivered, and we measure the local social impact, more or less the funding that is spent inside the country. We define our metrics, performance metrics as follows. We introduce the humanitarian return investment when it comes to the cost side. So we looking at the response cost without investments minus the response cost with investments minus the investment amount and divided by the investment amount. Regarding the lead time saving, we're looking at the lead time in the scenario without investment minus the lead time in the scenario with investment and dividing it by the lead time without investment. And similarly, for the local social impact increase, we're looking at the social impact in the scenario without investment minus the social impact with investment divided by the social impact without investment. I would like now to present to you a number of key findings that the model has generated. Looking here at the two metrics, response cost and the 10% delivery lead time. In these graphs, you can see the different response costs as well as the lead time. And you can see the different demand patterns that very much reflects different scale of disasters happening and how the cost and the lead time are actually changing depending on the scale of the disaster and the different operational setting. All of this in the scenario without investment. So we can see that the decentralized setting is by far cheaper than the centralized and the hybrid setting. But, and that we can see this on the time side, that there is a capacity restriction in the decentralized setting when it comes to larger responses. So for the responses up to the 200 to 350,000, the decentralized is pretty competitive when it comes to the lead time in regards to the 10% delivery. If it goes beyond that, obviously, then the capacity is very much restricted and the hybrid and the centralized setting are actually much faster. This is for the setting that a disaster is actually happening at day 400. There's no conflicts with other emergencies happening around that time. Looking at items that are of lower value, the capacity in the country that is affected is assumed to be low to medium. The international staff are far more expensive than local staff, and the international staff capacity is also higher than the local staff. All of these data is coming from the case studies that we have actually gathered. That we have carried out. The second finding I wanted to present is the scenario with investment. So we can clearly see that in terms of cost as well as in time saving, the investments have a positive impact across all of the settings. However, we can say that when it comes to the response cost, the hybrid setting, especially when the smaller to medium-sized disasters, has relatively the highest return on investment ratio. And then later on, it's very similar to the decentralized setting. In total results, it still remains the decentralized setting as the cheapest, but since there's quite a bit of saving potential for the hybrid setting, they are coming closer to each other. In regards to the 10% delivery lead time, you can see while before the decentralized setting was only faster in the smaller scale disasters, there's a tremendous time saving potential of almost up to 70% for this setting. And that also then leads in terms of total lead time that across all scales of disasters, the 10% delivery lead time is for the decentralized setting actually the best option. When it comes to the 90%, which I'm not showing here, however, it still remains like that only in the smaller scale disasters, the decentralized is faster. So despite all the investment, if it's a larger disaster, the decentralized setting will still have trouble to cope with the response. This setting is again set at the day 400 where the disaster is happening and investments have been made across all categories. And after 400 days, most of them have unfolded their impact. I'd like to summarize now the findings. So overall, the preparedness pays off for all the operation settings that we have looked into. The largest impact across all can be observed in the decentralized setting. That is very much supporting the localization agenda as well. That tremendous potential is there to invest into decentralized settings in the country. Another finding is that the holistic investments have significantly more impact than isolated investments, such as if you only invest into prepositioning. And lastly, and this is a topic that we don't have time to go very much deep into, but if you're interested, hopefully you will have the chance to read it in our paper very soon, is that there's a number of critical factors that have to be considered when making an investment decision. Firstly, is the impact of other emergencies. While I've shown you before all the scenarios with no other global emergencies happening, the findings show that there's tremendous impact on the hybrid and the centralized setting if there's an emergency happening around the same time. And the time will actually, the response time will go up significantly then for these two settings. The other very much important factor is the actual capacity in the country. If there's a certain capacity in the country in terms of staff availability as well as commodities, that obviously is of advantage for any decentralized setting. If there's a country with a very limited capacity, obviously that has a negative impact on decentralized settings. And the last point that is of quite some interest is while I was presenting the results for low value items, if you look into items of higher value, the procurement share goes up significantly and overrules at some point the expensive air transportation and expensive international deployments, and then also have an impact on the results. Thank you very much. Very happy now to take your questions. Thank you.